Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Stephanie Jackson. I am the Academic Program Partnership Manager here at Georgia Tech. And I just want to welcome you to this is our latest installment of our Safety Speaker Series this year. So we do expect this to be a very interesting and engaging session. Tales from an accidental career in industrial hygiene with Dr. Bruce Lippy. Now, if this is your first time here, or maybe you are returning, I just wanted to remind you that this Safety Speaker Series is presented by our Professional Masters in Occupational Safety and Health. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Babak Ashuri, the Executive Director of the Professional Masters in Occupational and Safety Health Program, and he's going to tell you a little bit about our program and then introduce you to our speaker for today. Dr. Ashuri?
Thank you, Stephanie, for kicking us off on this Thursday afternoon, end of the March, spring in the air. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Babak Ashuri. I'm Executive Director for our Professional Master's degree in Occupational Safety and Health. I'm professor at Georgia Tech. Regarding our program, the PMOSH program established, now we're talking about 10 years, almost 10 years ago, and it's a multidisciplinary graduate level degree. The format of that is primarily online, almost 99% online, with 3 visits throughout the 2-year program. It follows a cohort, and as we are approaching the deadline for the cohort 2025, we are accepting applications. April 15, about 2-3 weeks from now, we chose the tax day, so you won't forget about that, is the deadline for our cohort, who will start in August 2025. This will be the 2-year cohort that they go through the program. The program consists of both technical and managerial skill set, leadership skill set. It's designed to advance careers of the people who are in the occupational safety and health, with a focus on occupational safety and health leadership. You follow your own technical standards, OSHA guidelines, ISO standards, industrial hygiene, hazardous materials, how to deal with hazmat material management, storage, transportation, as well as ergonomics and human factors. But you also get exposed to a lot of softer skills, leadership, management, team building, as well as cost-benefit analysis, economic decision analysis, how to make a business case for safety investment. End of the program, our students, our graduates become equipped with both technical and soft skills in order to impact organization. They're going to be an agent of change to elevate the reputation of an organization as far as occupational safety and health. The program is certified by Board of Certified Safety Professionals. Upon the completion of the degree, you get your GSP designations, the Graduate Safety Practitioner. So if you like to know more about that, please contact us. I know there would be ample time throughout this presentation that you can reach out to us as far as, if you are interested. We had our information session a couple of weeks ago, and I believe that was the last one. But if you have any questions, you can reach out to any of our team members, including Stephanie or myself. We will be happy to answer any questions you might have about the degree. But our program sponsors a speaker series, and that's something very excited. And today I'm very glad to have one of the best people we could have as far as industrial hygiene. And who is better than Dr. Bruce Lippy, who is currently I don't know how many times you have retired from your practice, but the people keep pulling you back because of your wisdom and your experience. He's currently a president of the Lippy Group. But let me tell you a little more about the Bruce Lippy has a PhD in policy from the University of Maryland with concentration in regulatory economics and quantitative measures of management. He's a certified industrial hygienist, certified safety professional, and fellow of AIHA. So, somebody who knows in and out of the organization. He currently serves on the AIHA's Nanotechnology and Advanced Materials Committee. He served as a director of the nanomaterials research at CPWR for the first 5 years of the grants that they have with the NIOSH, as far as advancing safety and health in the construction industry. He continued working with them on a limited capacity after his retirement from CPWR. He has been advising a number of organizations. He has spoken in many conferences and events, particularly in the area of the nanomaterials. And those organizations, NNI, NIOSH, NIEHS, OSHA, NASA, AIHA, and National Safety Council, and of course, several universities. I believe, Bruce, you are still teaching on a part-time capacity at Johns Hopkins in the areas related to the occupational safety and health. And he brings a wealth of career, wealth of experience over a number of years. But I don't know why Bruce calls his career as sort of, incidental, something that you fall into that, but, certainly is quite a career. I would like to welcome Bruce, and please give Bruce a virtual round of applause, a yellow jacket round of applause, and welcome for your session. The floor is yours, Bruce.
Okay, how do I control slides?
I think your slides are up.
Oh, they are up. Okay.
Yeah, so you should have control to advance the slides.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Bobby. That's a lovely introduction, and I'll explain the accidental part. But they did a survey a number of years ago for industrial hygienists and said, how did you get into the profession? And one of the options, exactly what you said, fell into it. And I think that was about 40%. So it does seem like somewhat of an unusual profession, but these are the workplaces that I've been in over my career. I was on the second level there at the Sears Tower checking out window washing equipment for the operating engineers. The second picture is underground, about a half a mile in the WIP, they're called a waste isolation plant, where they're storing low-level waste in Carlsbad, New Mexico. The one with me dressed like a CIA agent, those are all spent nuclear power units for nuclear subs. They're outside instead of buried because that was an agreement with the Russians. They needed to count and see that they're there, and they're supposed to do the same thing. Finally, at the bottom, I did a part of a survey of hotels owned by the Intercontinental Hotel chain. We did environmental surveys, and I was doing the one here in Paris. I'm up on the roof. That's the opera there. But it was, I felt kind of foreign up there in France. And here was a Baltimore Airquill International air handling unit, which, I'm from Baltimore. So it was kind of nice to see it. Okay, I'm a little lost on advancing here. Oh, all right, thank you.
You did that, yeah.
Just to put things in perspective, I am as old as this car. I was born in 1951. This is a Buick Special. Not sure why they called it that. I'm doing a little bit better in paint job than this particular car. Next. I also won a spelling bee in 1965. I didn't actually win it completely. I was a certificate of merit. I came in second. I choked on abbreviation, but I thought you all should know that. Next, please. Bobak mentioned I have a company, the Lippy Group LLC. Here's our picnic last year. I am a lone wolf consultant, is what I'm saying here. And I've been doing that for quite some time. Next. Learning objectives that I'd like to present to you now is that I'd like you to be able to describe several keys to managing safety and industrial hygiene, specifically in disaster responses. I'd like you to be able to give several examples of the importance of interdisciplinary teams. You'll run into those routinely here. List at least 2 innovative techniques for measuring contaminants released during disasters. And then finally, we're going to talk about Hanford, Washington, explain how respirator cartridges can be tested against a thorough mix of hundreds of chemical vapors. That was our challenge. Next. So this is my presentation, 4 sections. Start with my torturous path to health and safety, lessons from ground zero cleanup, lessons from the anthrax decontamination job that I was on, and finally, lessons from nuclear weapons site cleanups. Next, please. Let's start with number 1 here. How did I get into industrial hygiene? So I went to college at Western Maryland College, a liberal arts school in Westminster, Maryland. This is our logo, the Green Terrors. They played football so horribly, I suggested it would be the Green Terriers, much more appropriate. Next slide. Here's my bona fides as far as having a biology degree. Nice shot of a paramecium. Next. Continue. Then I went to art school. I'm not sure exactly why, but I studied graphic design, graphic production, and I also did some illustration. Next. And then I had no job, no money, and I was married and my wife was pregnant. So next, I hit on a friend at the Maryland Division of Labor and Industry. You got any jobs there? And next, they said, yes, in the training division. We need somebody to make slides and production. And here's some of the work that I did. This is the next slide. Next cut. This is one of my artwork, The Lesser of Two Evils. And, they hired me. They said, we can't hire an artist. We're going to have to call you an industrial hygienist. I said, I don't give a damn what you call me. I need a job. So that's how I got into it. After I got into it, they said, well, you have to pass a state test for industrial hygienist to keep this job. So it was a little scary, but I really have enjoyed doing this work. Next, please. So let me talk about ground zero. Next. This is me. I arrived September 19th, and I worked for the International Union of Operating Engineers, the heavy equipment operators. And so my job was to run industrial hygiene samples, to give out respirators and eye protection. And if you look in the pile, you will see a firefighter with no protection at all wearing a t-shirt. So that was part of the challenge. Next. This was my office for 2 months. You can see the smoke in the background and the cranes. This was, we stocked boxes of respirators and our sampling equipment. My boss loved the steam gauge logo for the operating engineers. I thought it started to look like a fireworks place in North Carolina along the roadside, but it did what we wanted. Next. This is a quote from John Henshaw, who was the head of OSHA. And he said, this is potentially the most dangerous workplace in America. And I fully agreed with him. I like John. He was a good working professional. And one of the things that I was most proud about this work was that this was a terrible environment. And yet these heavy equipment operators are so well trained, we lost no one. On the whole project, there was no deaths from injuries on the job site. And so I really think part of the reason for that was the skill of these union heavy equipment operators. So I was proud to represent them. Next, Bobby. The smoke and the dust really were problems for months. There was a fire raging under the pile from all the combustible materials down there. So they actually called in experts who put out coal mine fires, which are notoriously tough to extinguish. And it burned until December. Next. Part of the problem is that trades that don't deal with disasters were critical at the World Trade Center, but they were unprepared. This is an iron worker. Iron workers were absolutely essential there. There was all those metal girders that needed to be cut up and moved, but they had no idea how they would fit into a disaster structure like the Unified Command, for instance. Next. The other real problem, and this is a flaw with the OSHA's HAZWOPER standard. If you're not familiar with it, I hope you are. The Hazardous Waste Operations Emergency Response. This is the emergency response part of the standard, 1910-120. And it basically says that these are temporary workers. They're called skilled support personnel in the standard. And what it says is you do not have to go through all the training that's laid out for everybody else on a hazardous waste site. We can give you a briefing on site, which is really was part of the whole problem here. Next. There were so many groups out there collecting samples. It was great. OSHA, NIOSH, you would expect, EPA. There were a lot of universities. My colleagues at Hopkins were there, lots of consultants. Con Edison was trying to get communication back up, so they were working, above and below ground. The insurance companies, Liberty Mutual was there. Next. And we collected data and daily shared it with folks over the phone. But of course, that, given the nature of conspiracies in this country, that was called a cabal of experts deciding what data to hide from the public. That was the New York Post, a really fine newspaper. So there was a lot of this issue with what are they hiding? Next, please. So for my work, we sampled inside cabs, and it proved a lot more pragmatic than personal sampling. As you folks know, OSHA and the standards says you will do personal sampling. We don't want a bunch of area samples. What we found, though, was that the sampling equipment hanging on the heavy equipment operators got in the way of their work. And also, these folks are a little bit challenged as far as size. So there was a lot of pinching of Tygon tubes by bellies in this heavy equipment. So we kept losing samples and consequently moved it here. There's also OSHA samples hanging here for silica. There was such coordination that we allowed OSHA to come on board this equipment whenever they wanted and set samples. There was amazing cooperation at the site. Next. We sampled when the pace slowed down to look for human remains. And that's Pat Bell, a really fine operator that I worked with down in Beckley, West Virginia. The hazmat team that I was on was based out of Beckley, West Virginia, and you can see a sampling pump there. We used to hang pink ribbons on the equipment, heavy equipment that we'd actually hung sampling pumps. There was so much on the site in this cramped, 14-acre site. Next. Let me give you a broad overview of the results. The majority of the sample were low, even at the beginning, against OSHA standards, but asbestos had the greatest overexposures, and it was the most challenging. Next, elevations on any of the samples where there was a problem were task-related, and there was many more community samples than worker samples, as you would imagine. This is fireproofing on the trusses. When those planes hit the towers, they shook loose most of the insulation on the beams, which of course made it easier for the buildings to collapse because the fireproofing wasn't there. Next. The difficulties with sampling was that this enormous destructive power crushed the fibers from the sprayed-on applications so that they were short and thin. And usually under the resolution of phase contrast microscopy, I did only transmission electron microscopy because if you didn't, you were missing everything. And of course, the OSHA standards allow for the asbestos standard for phase contrast. When you try to meet the recommended volumes to get good sample results, always overloaded with dust. So it was problematic. Next. In my estimation, the greatest risks were safety, not health. There were 30 to 40 near misses, but we had no fatalities, as I mentioned. You'll note the gentleman here with the respirator positioned nicely under his neck. We called those neckties. We didn't use the term respirators because that's the way they were worn. And you can see the incredible mess these guys are picking up with grapplers. Next. This occurred when one of the operators got off the equipment to go get a cup of coffee. He came back and it had fallen through the pile. So please don't think coffee is harmful. It really isn't. There were a lot of these. This is the kind of work that went on. I call this a facial laceration device. It was unlike any kind of demolition job. I worked on the demolition of launch towers down at Cape Canaveral where Elon was building his stuff. And nothing like this would ever get passed, but this was not a normal demo. Next. Other thing, restricted practices were allowed on this site. These folks are in personnel baskets that New York City does not allow to be used because of the risk of, well, of course, if the hook fails, they all fall to their death. But for this job, they allowed it. Not only did they allow it, but early on, OSHA cited a company for picking up people in a trash dumpster. They had like 5 or 6 folks in trash dumpsters several times. And you can see if you look carefully, there's a worker in this pile. It was incredibly dangerous to move around on the pile. Next. Everything took so long. It was a Wild West show. And you know, the samples took place like the first week, got a sample done after the terrorist attack. But fit testing, 36 days later, issuance of a safety and health plan in its formal shape, 48 days, and first formal training was 78 days after the terrorist hit. This quote I really want to emphasize: you do not rise to the occasion, you rise to your level of training. And so this is why we had such a problem with the culture, the safety culture on this site. Next. Another lesson is respiratory protection was really poorly managed, as you see from some of those shots, but we chose the right protection. I worked with NIOSH, as did others, and we've got the cartridges that were adequately protective, but you got to wear them. We gave out tons of respirators. OSHA gave out 130,000, EPA 22,000. We gave out 11,000. Unfortunately, we didn't train enough, so a lot of these were thrown away as if they were temporary respirators. You know, it just was crazy that we went through all these respirators. Next. And compliance was poor. You know, I kept hearing from my boss, so I think things are getting better out there about respirators. So I went out on these days and personally looked at every piece of equipment on site and said, were they wearing a respirator or weren't they? The best was October 11th, where we got up to half the equipment operators were wearing respirators. And that was because the general president got wind of it and raised holy hell. So, you know, if you look much better, 80 to 90%. Fresh kills is where we took the debris from ground zero, shipped it via barge, and unloaded it there. The difference was the Army Corps of Engineers was running that show. So they don't put up with a lot of nonsense. Next. We put workers at risk by not getting respirator fit testing on site until October 17th. This is 3M mobile van. You can see our steam gauge is on there, the operating engineers. My boss said, you know, damn it, I'm going to get this thing on site, called him up, and he worked his magic. But prior to that, OSHA did user seal checks, what I'm sure you know about. You cover the cartridges and suck in and hope that the respirator collapses a bit. That's not allowed on the OSHA respirator standard, but they were doing that up front. And OSHA bragged that they had 80% effectiveness, but they gave out 4,000 a day. That means 800 failures. Next. And of course, wearing respirators made communication difficult. Tons of equipment and the noise of picking up this metal, it was tough. So everybody, including myself, would pull down a respirator like this to communicate. But of course, that is a very bad practice. Next. Not transitioning from rescue to recovery put responders at risk. There was this great urge to push this job because, by God, the terrorists aren't going to win. But in any disaster, rescue is when it's chaotic, people take risks. It's almost impossible to prevent that completely. But the key is somebody on the site has to say, I'm sorry, there's no more people coming out alive. Now it's time for recovery. So you slow down. It's a paced work. No one takes wild risks anymore. And you go to recovering bodies and body parts. We had 300 bodies taken out of the pile, but 18,000 body parts. No one came out of that pile after the second day alive. Although the one person in Turkey in an earthquake lasted 15 days. So then you get into cleanup, which is normal. Bobak, next one. Communication was poor. This was a sign somebody put up, I don't know who, on the site, and you can see someone else put up a picture of one of the folks that was lost in that terrible event. We got a thing together pretty quickly because we had a print shop and put out this, protect yourself while helping others. And it just talked about asbestos on the site because that was our greatest concern. By the way, the pictures of the folks lost at Ground Zero were everywhere, and it broke your heart to keep seeing all these smiling faces. Next, please. We had a unique problem with access control. Access control is critical, and the on any disaster site, but on this one, of course, it's in Manhattan. It's a very crowded place. We're at the bottom of Manhattan, and there were lots of points where you could come into the site. And celebrities want to come down and help or at least be seen. This is Miss America. I like this quote. Katie visited Ground Zero with the USO in downtown Manhattan in the morning. She spent the afternoon with major designers picking out her wardrobe for the year's service. A lot of this did not help. In fact, I had to give up my badge so my boss could give it to a NASCAR driver because he loves NASCAR. Oh, she put out a document called Inside the Green Line, touting all the good work they did, and they did a lot of good work. But one of the things they did was paint a green line around the site, and if you stepped inside that green line, you had to have a respirator and eye protection. But of course, in construction, you can't keep that up. We put in jersey barriers, concrete barriers, and that was much better at keeping folks out. Next. The operating engineers had a contract with Department of Energy to look at innovative techniques and equipment for cleaning up the nuclear weapons site. I'll talk a little more about that. But we were able to get some equipment from that testing we did onto this site. You're looking at a person operating a jackhammer remotely with a pendant control, so you'd have to stand at the cutting edge. So some of the stuff was quite useful. Next. I'm going to talk about the anthrax decontamination. Next. Thanks. So I was a consultant to the firm that was doing the final sampling at this building, the AMI building, American Media Inc. In Boca Raton. That's the home of the National Enquirer and the Weekly World, and David Pecker of Catch and Kill fame, among many of the annex of the administration that's currently in place now, getting elected. Next slide. Full disclosure, my brother's written for Weekly World. This is the piece that he wrote. He wrote two pieces, Rockies to break off and become asteroids. And what the Weekly World said is, send us 10 ideas. We'll pick two and you write those, but don't mention Kathy Gifford. She keeps suing us. So I read that letter. That was all they actually said. So it may not be the most credible source of information. Next. AMI is where they had the first anthrax fatality. This gentleman, Robert Stevens, September 30th, he had sought medical treatment. He had flu-like symptoms. He actually was checked into the hospital, died October 5th in the hospital. The FBI contacted Boca Raton Police Department when they suspected, and actually he had a test done and said, yeah, this is anthrax. Next. So the EPA and the CDC shared all of their sampling data because they were there before us. We were at the very tail end of this project, and the FBI did not. But I just wanted to point out, would you hit the next one for me, Bobak? This is the mailroom on the first floor. Red dots indicate positive samples for Bacillus anthracis. And you'll notice the squares are swipe samples and the triangles are heap of vacuum. But we clearly could see that, and they never found the letter, but certainly like all the other attacks, this must have been in the mailroom. Next. And their data bore this out. As you go up to the second floor, you see less of these, although you see them scattered around a bit. Next, on the third floor, there's even less. So that helped us a lot in planning the cleanup. Next. The previous sampling done in this building showed that this building could have been open before we even got there. They fumigated with chlorine dioxide gas in July 2004. And they put down 2,000 spore strips throughout the building. And the spore strips are there so that you can test whether or not the fumigation works. They would then send those off to a lab to culture and see if there was any live spores. This was, of course, something like Bacillus subtilis. It would not be anthrax, but it's still a surrogate that works. 100% kill rate. They did surface samples, 952 throughout the building. All were negative for Bacillus anthracis growth. However, there was this dispute between the owner and the abatement firm that tied up the data. The owner brought in a company, I think it's called Bio One. Rudolph Giuliani, I believe, was an owner or part owner of some of this, and they were not getting paid. It was a discrepancy of what the payment should be. Anyway, they left. They walked off the site. But the EPA, they told the EPA, this is proprietary, don't release our data. And the EPA wouldn't release the data. So we had to go back and redo it again. Next. Even though the National Research Council or the National Academies wrote a book reopening public facilities, in that they said in July 2004, the AMI building was declared to have been successfully decontaminated. But that was not enough. The EPA and particularly, the EPA wanted us primarily to go in and redo this, so we did. Next. First off, there was tons of boxes in the basement that we had to get out of there, sent off to be disinfected, and brought back. They wanted to save these boxes of photographs and other information that they wanted to hang on to. So we sent this for autoclaving, which is basically steam to kill off any spores. The boxes had the spore strips in them so that the lab could test. Next. After the 502 pallets of boxes with photos were taken out of the basement, we I had this gentleman. He was an environmental engineer, and he helped to lay out and figure out how many samples to take. Did a very fine job. This gets back to interdisciplinary teams. So all these samples turned out to be negative in the basement. One of the things that we had heard, and I have no way to verify this, is that the owner was under the impression there was a photograph of Elvis in the coffin that they were looking for. That could be totally apocryphal. I have no idea. But The Sun was one of the magazines that had some connection with this building. Next. So a technical working group was set up to advise the owner and the environmental cleanup crew and improve sampling plans and the health and safety plan. I based the health and safety plan on what OSHA had recommended. It makes great sense to go with what the regulators say. I was co-chair of this technical working group with Mark Durno, a real great guy to work with. He was an on-scene coordinator from Region 5. And so at the end of this process, after they approved the sampling plan and health and safety plan, and all the sampling was done, Mark and I signed the final release for on behalf of the technical working group, saying it's okay to come back in the building. That carried some liability because anthrax spores can lie dormant for 40 years. But anyway, we're still going. Next. The support we got was tremendous. I have nothing but praise for the federal government, despite what's going on now. The OSHA Office of Occupational Medicine pitched in on this project, as did their health response team out of Salt Lake City. Was fabulous. And Lawrence Livermore Laboratory provided some experts. And Marcor Remediation was the company that did the actual cleanup. So it was a great joint effort, and I really relied on them. Next. EPA had regulatory authority in this project through FIFRA, Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, as a crisis exemption. So the owner of this building said, let's try to just keep this in Palm Beach County Health Department, can we? And I said, you're crazy if you think the federal government's not coming in on one of the major anthrax attacks, the first one. So of course they did, and they used this. Because we use bleach to decontaminate items and the pieces we take in and out, sampling equipment. That was a regulatory crux that the EPA used. Next. We use some unusual sampling equipment. This is a dry filter unit. It was provided by the EPA, but designed really for battlefield use. So in case there was some kind of bio weapon being used. So flow rate is incredibly high, 15 cubic feet per minute. And you use larger filters, 47 millimeter filters. Still needs to get analyzed, but great units, tough as hell. Next. Here's how you calibrate. It's very easy to do and flexible. They had extensions. We could put samples up into plenum to look for possible contamination up there. Next. We also used a piece of equipment that I had never actually even seen before. It's called total suspended particulate. Now, this came again by recommendations from this working group. And this is an environmental sample. This is an EPA baby. They sit outside for weeks or months at a time. But the flow rate is incredible, 39 to 60 cubic feet per minute versus 5 liters per minute for asbestos sampling, for instance. It's got a timer. It measures continuous flow and pressure and records it. Great units and durable. Next. And also the filter media is really large. It's 8 inches by 10 inches. You can see it in place here in the unit, but I'm comparing it to a 25 millimeter filter from our business in industrial hygiene. Just no comparison. That red is the 8 by 10. Next. So the sampling started on the 3rd floor and we worked down. And the stairwell and the elevators are all plasticized. And you can see the HEPA unit there, called a microtrap in terminology. They were put there to create negative pressure. You probably wonder also about the transporter room. The top floor, the corporate floor of this building, as you got out of the elevator, was painted up to look like the Star Trek transporter room. This is a very bizarre building, I gotta be honest. Next. So we put the samplers in place, and then we did aggressive sampling like you would for asbestos. I'm sure you folks are familiar with this. Take leaf blowers and try to kick up absolutely whatever you can and turn fans on and keep them running. Next. We ship the samples off to microbiology specialists. They are, and also to a Sentinel lab in the laboratory response network. With the Sentinel labs are those that are designed and indicated as where you go during a bioweapons or some sort of a terrorist attack. No bacillus anthracis was seen, and that was our clearance criteria. None, no spores that are active. And so here's what we learned. The use of these other pieces of equipment really worked well. The total suspended particulate units are more readily available than these DFUs, which are again used more for the military. There was a lot of calibration required. I didn't do any of it. I couldn't figure this unit out. I've never seen one before. But we had folks in the team that jumped right on it from OSHA and the EPA. And that's why I say multidisciplinary teams are so critical. Next. The quarantine was lifted February 12th, 2007. The building's been reoccupied. So one of the things that I was impressed with was I think the original building after the attack was purchased for $40,000 and then sold after the quarantine was lifted for something like 10 million. Like, don't quote me on that, but the insurance company told after the anthrax attack, told the owner, you got to get rid of this building. So anyway, it was a successful opening. Next. So last, I'm going to talk about nuclear weapons site cleanup, which is what I'm doing now. I work with a team at the Hanford site. So next slide, Bobby. If you're not familiar with Hanford, it was 640 square miles purchased by the government in 1943 to develop nuclear weapons. The residents on this area of the country is pretty sparsely populated, but they were given 3 weeks to leave. Get out of your house, you got 3 weeks. And they brought in nearly 50,000 workers. And these camps were constructed to house these workers. Next. Here's another shot of housing in the area. It was an amazing project. Next. Here is the present day Richland, Washington. That's the name of the town where Hanford's outside of. And there's the Columbia River. My boss, a guy named Tommy Heitland, wrote a report for the Senate called Train Wreck Along the River of Money. They called the Columbia River the River of Money because so much money went into building the bomb and also cleaning up the mess afterwards. Next. I want to give you some feel for the scope of this incredible endeavor. So there were 8 mess halls. You're looking at one here. They were all the size of a football field. They consumed 272,000 pounds of meat in 1 week on this site. 5,000 pounds of sausage for one breakfast. Every day, each of these mess halls went through 15 tons of potatoes and 8,000 pounds of coffee. And every week, 13 carloads of beer were consumed. So I thought that was remarkable. It was an incredible job. Next. The B plant, the first nuclear reactor, was built and operated in 1944 and produced plutonium for the world's first nuclear explosion at Alamogordo, and then, of course, the Nagasaki bomb. The reason this is so remarkable, Enrico Fermi's lab at University of Chicago proved that that a controlled reaction was possible. This is 2 years prior to building this gigantic plant. They built this so fast that they didn't actually have drawings all the time. They would send crews out in the evening to make good drawings of what they had just constructed. It was fabulous how quickly they put this up. Next. I worked on a team that helped deactivate this. This is one of the canyons. This is where it's Purex, the plutonium uranium extraction facility, where they pulled out from the rods. They pulled out what they could use to make, they call them pellets, to then put into nuclear weapons. This thing was extremely hot, and so folks didn't work in the canyon once it was operational. There were no cameras in this thing when they were trying to go through production. So there were a lot of analog dials in the control room. Remarkable that they could do this kind of work. Deactivation means closing down all the processes and then letting it sit. And I don't know how long it's going to sit. There's also entombment where they seal it completely in concrete, but that's not happening at this building. There has been a leak here because there was a tunnel coming out that they didn't account for properly. Next. Here's a lesson. It takes a lot more time to clean up the contamination than to make it. This is the Energy Department's vitrification plant. They've been building this for a very long time, billions of dollars. They're going to take the high-level waste, put it in these huge glass tubes, sealed completely in glass, and then bury it so there's no chance of leak. But the estimate went from 110 billion to as much as 660 billion for the entire Hanford site. They want to have this high-level waste glass process going by 2036. I would say good luck. There's been a lot of problems in getting it going. Next. My work is at the tank farms. We're talking about ironic terms, tank farms. There are 177 of these. They're all underground. There were 149 that were single shelled, 28 that were double shelled. And the double shell gives it more protection, obviously. The single shells were built earlier from 44 to 64. Next. These tanks have a very long and difficult history. You can see the size here. These guys are working in it. Hanford has 40% of all the radioactivity that existed across the entire nuclear weapons complex. Each of these tanks holds 53,000 to 1.4 million gallons, and up to 45% of the single shells are believed to be leaking. 140 million curies released in the air in the Columbia rivers in the 40s and 50s. That's an enormous microcuries, what can be fatal if they're ingested. And they first thought this was going to be temporary wartime expedient. Didn't work out that way. Next, thank you. The chemical composition and concentration keep changing because there's all this radiochemistry going on from the radiation. Approximately 1,500 chemicals have been identified in these tanks. Pacific Northwest Laboratory has identified 60 they call chemicals of potential concern, either toxicity or quantity. And so next. There have been lots of complaints going way back. There have been more than a dozen technical reviews of tank farm hazards over the past 30 years. And this study by Office of Inspector General, remember when we had Inspector Generals, said health problems were legitimate and caused by exposure. In other words, the folks who were having health issues weren't making it up. And it was from leaks from the tanks, and folks are routinely complaining about odors. Next. So an independent team of experts, as a lesson, we can facilitate solutions to complex technical and I would emphasize political problems. June 2016, the Hanford Atomic Metal Trades Council, which is a union representing most of the workers on the site, put in a stop work order. People were getting sick, and they said, we're done, and we're not coming back until we get self-contained breathing apparatus in all parts of the tank farm. So they did that, went back to work. Then in August, Hamtac and the Washington River Protection Solutions, which is the firm that manages it, agreed on testing of cartridges with third-party review. We were selected, my colleagues, Knut Ringen's company, Stone Turn Consultants, to do this review, and it began in November of 2016. Next, please. The memo of agreement said all work inside tank parameters would be performed with self-contained breathing apparatus until the cartridge testing was completed and the results demonstrated that they provide worker protection from the tank farm vapors. And this had to be confirmed by a third party independent of either of the others. And we acted in that capacity, and we were concerned because it's terrible trying to work in self-contained breathing apparatus. That was a big problem at the World Trade Center. Firefighters were trained on this equipment, but not to work all day. And so we worked on this next. Knut Ringen, who owns the Stone Turn Consultants, was the person directing the project, and he assembled this team of respirator experts. And I don't want to get into names right now, but we combined, we had about 250 years of professional experience. You can see there were some fairly august individuals there. Next. What are my qualifications as a respirator expert? Next. Well, I'm wearing a PAPR on my birthday. I think that should say it all. This is inside our nanotechnology testing, by the way. Next. There weren't any health physicists in the team, but as IH, as we all knew, next, that radiation causes giant ants. One quick anecdote. I love this film. It's Them. It's from, I guess, the 1950s. It's a classic. And whenever I would go to one of the sites where, someone else does, that's great to see. Whenever I go to one of the sites in the desert at one of these weapons plants, at the end of a meeting, folks would always ask, anyone have any questions? And I would, in a straight face, say, do you have any problem with giant ants? And everybody thought that was so asinine that no one responded. I did it routinely. So that's why I have it here. Next. We tested 2 Scott cartridges, and you can see I'm not going to go over all the things they protect against. They're very protective cartridges. The one on the right is even good for filtration and the P100, so for particles. So good cartridges to test. Next. Some of our team, not me, had experience in building and testing cartridge service life equipment like what you see in front of you. They said what Highline Engineering and Pacific Northwest Laboratories came up with was fabulous. It was really quite good. Next. Here it is in operation. They're drawing vapors off of one of the tanks into this device. And what you're looking at is the way to regulate each of the samples. They have, next slide is a little bit easier to see. So the 2-inch rise you see at the top, that's where the vapors come in and they go into this chamber upstream, where the things you're looking at are sampling tubes with a vacuum pump, and it's all set at the correct flow rate for that particular chemical. They sample that, it goes through the cartridge into the downstream chamber, where once again it's pulled into charcoal tubes or silica gel tubes at different rates as defined by NIOSH methods. And then there's a vacuum pump, and it all goes to the lab to be analyzed. Northwest Labs, Pacific Northwest Labs handled that. Next. They also had some really cutting-edge monitoring technology on site. These units were firing lasers and also infrared across the tank farm and could pick up stray organic vapor clouds. It was incredible. And the truck had gas chromatograph and mass spec in it. So if folks said we're smelling something, they could zip right out there and run samples. It was very impressive. Next. Our team looked at all these chemicals and said, ammonia is in most of these tanks. So let's use ammonia as an indicator. And we said you ought to buy these toxi-rays for each person in the tank farm, which is a considerable expense. And they said, sure. And so folks wore these. If the light or the alarm went off, the whole crew would get out of that area. Industrial hygiene would come in and do some sampling. Next. Going to end with the fact that there are success stories that I want to bring to your attention. This is Rocky Flats in Colorado. This is an old shot. Rocky Flats had both a plutonium and uranium site to it, and it was incredibly intense. I worked there trying to get some chemicals out of the building, and it took us weeks. I worked at a station where I had top secret clearance from the Department of Energy at one point, but when I was working there, I did not. So they had one person sitting, staring at me all day, and it was scary. But then if I went to the bathroom, he would be right beside me in the other urinal, and I thought this guy's only qualifications, he's got a really big bladder. But now, next slide. This is what it looks like now. They're still monitoring wells in place, but they got rid of all those buildings. So we can make progress with this. And I was very pleased to be part of that. Next. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and take questions. I would say that there's some real silliness in our business. The lawyers sometimes take over. I love this. Remove this cover before using. Can you imagine putting on a respirator like with this and just saying, oh, darn, I should have read the instructions. Thank you. I appreciate time. I'll take questions.
You can enter your questions in the chat, and we can get those in front of Dr. Lippy.
All right.
Wonderful, wonderful. That was great.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. And yeah, I think Carlton has a question. No,
Carlton Wright says, would you say that since PCM testing was not effective for asbestos, that OSHA should change the standard since the fibers can be too small and it doesn't actually tell you if it's asbestos. Would that be too cost? I don't think it's a matter of cost. The idea of OSHA changing any standard certainly won't happen in the next 4 years. We have a heat stress standard that they've put together that Maryland now has its own standard. Some other states do too, but there's not going to be any regulatory movement in OSHA. And actually, most of the sampling, phase contrast gives you an indication that if you need to, you can then go to TEM. Except with the AHERA standard and the EPA, you have to use TEM for final clearance, and we have. Yes, the question is, will there be a recording? Yes. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And we also have a YouTube channel for our professional masters in occupational safety and health, and you can watch the previous recordings of a speaker series, safety speaker series. I think maybe Nicole or somebody else can also provide a link to that YouTube page, but you should be able to find that. Yeah, Bruce, it was amazing. One of the question I have, sort of, occupational safety and occupational health, what each discipline needs to know about one another. And I'm just wondering, naturally, some of the folks falls into the safety side of the house. Some goes for the more of a health track. But I believe there are learning points from one to another. I mean, do you have any suggestions? Do you have any sort of, recommendation as far as what each body of knowledge should be?
Well, I will tell you that I got certified as a safety professional because I was on too many job sites as a certified industrial hygienist and was afraid I'm going to miss something that was much more of a threat than the sampling I'm doing. Quite often the sampling that we do are under OSHA standards. So I really think it's important to try to get as much as you can of both to be a fully rounded professional in this field. Otherwise, you really can miss the critical pieces. And I have in the past on some jobs blown it because I wasn't up to speed on it. I think the other thing I would say is don't take on work that you are not qualified for, even if you're certified. I never do process safety management because entire plants can blow up if I don't know what I'm doing. So, just because you're certified doesn't mean you're cleared to do all the work there is out there in our fields. This is the field is quite variable as far as what folks are up to and should be doing. So I would caution folks. I didn't have insurance except the first couple of years. The best insurance is don't take on work that looks shady and don't do something that you are not personally qualified for. Other questions?
Wonderful. Yeah, I believe, David put a question and I think Jordan followed up on that. But I read David's question. I've heard what happens after a catastrophe called the disaster after the disaster. It sounds like some of the Wild West you describe at World Trade Center fits that description. How can chaos best be reduced in the immediate aftermath of a disaster?
Well, again, on that scale that I showed, it is very tough to control things. In fact, most folks who are saved in some kind of disaster are saved by civilians because they're first on site. If it's a car wreck or a truck overturns, they're the first there. But the key is to really try to follow the incident command system. We've had that in place for a very long time. And that says you've got to know where you fit in the structure and do what you're supposed to do and don't do other things. We had firefighters directing heavy equipment. They didn't know what the hell they were doing, but they were trying to get folks out of the way so they could look for remains of their colleagues. But and walking in the back of a piece of equipment, every piece of equipment has blind spots that the operator can't see. And we teach folks how to avoid blind spots. But, that's why I really do think it's important that somebody takes charge immediately. and tries to follow the disaster protocols that we have.
Wonderful. Jordan has a question regarding decontaminations of HEPA banks and air handlers. Was asking why was the ClO2 chosen instead of VHP?
I don't know. We did not do the chlorine dioxide. That was done previously by Bio1, I think, and that's what they chose. I think it's easier to work with, but I'm not sure why it was chosen. That's a good question. I don't. It may be purely on a cost basis.
Thank you. And Labib, your question, I think one of our team members, maybe Stephanie, probably can send you a direct message to the website, the PMOSH website, PMOSH program. So you should be able to see that. Yeah.
I will post the link to our contact us form, and then you can ask that question and we'll get you a response.
Absolutely. Any final questions for Bruce? I know it's top of the hour. We are over our time. First of all, as always, it's always pleasure listening to you. And I think, you did a fantastic job summarizing a wonderful career, a meaningful career, having impact on people's lives and being involved on some of the, really cool projects, I would say, very sensitive and very cool at the same time. You really told us stories, and this is a story, and this whole 1 hour goes really fast. I think this is something that makes the career of an occupational safety and health specialist meaningful.
Good.
Any final thoughts, any final words from you, Bruce, before we conclude?
Everyone's got my contact information. I just would like to say thank you to these folks in this career. It's a very important, the work that these folks are doing and will be doing. So my thanks.
Yeah, that's your contact information in case they want to be in touch with you, or in case they want to seek some advice or some consulting opportunity maybe. And by that, we're gonna wrap up today's presentation. I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of the deadline, upcoming deadline in a couple of weeks, April 15. And that's we would love to have as many applicants, as many of you consider joining the program and become one of our great network of PMOSH alum. The deadline is April 15. Any information regarding that, if you scan that QR code, takes you there. But one of our team members, as I said, Stephanie or myself or somebody else, definitely would be able to answer your question. By that, we conclude our today's speaker series on the occupational safety and health. And thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Dr. Lippy, for wonderful presentation. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be safe out there, folks.
That's right. See you all. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Thank you, Stephanie and Brian.